Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
We are back, my friends, on the Mockingcast. I'm so glad to be with you. We've got some really fun things planned. I hope everyone got to listen to the Deja Vu episode, which I think Ethan and TJ, who does the engineering for us, did an absolutely amazing job. I think, top to bottom. If you haven't gotten to hear that one, it's like Mockingbird does This American Life. RJ, your favorite show. I almost feel like you should be narrating it, but Ethan's voice far out matches even yours, I think, in terms of its dulcet tones.
Don't point out the obvious. It's hurtful. It's painful.
Well, how are you guys today?
Good, back at work. Like, it's still hot, I mean, it's Houston. We're good. Moving along. Yeah.
Moving right along, as the Muppets say. What about you, Arj?
We're doing well, but just had a very busy weekend, joyful weekend. Did a wedding, which was really, really fun, but that always, requires some energy, obviously. And then our littlest boy, Marshall, turned 2 on Sunday, so had a big party for him at our house. Smoked a brisket in true Texas fashion, but yeah, just it's a joyful time, but a busy time. So I'm a little I have to catch up on some sleep, I think, at some point, maybe this weekend.
Well, I have to share that we saw the video that your wife posted of Marshall, who just turned 2, telling the camera that he just turned 2 and speaking in a sentence, and our little son, who just turned 2 as well, who cannot speak even remotely. We feel like, why aren't you more like Marshall? What's wrong with this child?
Well, yeah,
so yet again,
we posted that, as all parents do, to judge, as everyone does on Facebook, to judge other people and have them feel less secure and hopeful about their own life. So, message received, it sounds like, which I'm glad
please
about.
let Jamie know that we felt condemned, just not broadly. We felt very specifically condemned by that action. So, thanks for nothing.
Perfect.
Yeah,
mission accomplished.
Well, I'm glad you did a wedding this weekend, because we're actually going to be talking a little bit about relationships today, and we're going to start with this kind of unbelievable piece that appeared in the New York Times, the Modern Love column, from which we draw quite a bit, by Brooke Williams, called "Honey, I Swept the Floor." This one was, here we go. Closing the Whirlpool's door with an exaggerated swagger, Christopher rolled down his Oxford sleeves and said, "Just unloaded the dishwasher." I stared at him. I had loaded the dishwasher that same day without feeling the need to tell anyone. I have heard him, my husband, tell clients, if you fail to define your brand, your competition will. It took me a while to realize that he was applying the principles of branding to our marriage. Christopher and I both have jobs, sharing household duties and responsibilities for our 2 children. In our sane moments, we appreciate each other's contributions. But when the chaos of our life gets to be too much, we turn on each other. After our son was born, there was so much to do and so little time that everything turned into a negotiation. Whose turn it was to sleep in, who got a night out with friends, etc. We continued to divvy up tasks randomly as we always had, but the negotiations grew increasingly contentious. Without any division of labor or set roles, we each thought we were doing everything because we were. While he never actually came out and said, "I do more than you," he didn't need to. By consistently claiming credit for everything he did, he was dominating the dialogue in our new domestic world order and positioning himself as the winner in the who is doing more fight. By the time I figured this out, he had already captured a significant amount of brand mind share. Whose day was harder, who was responsible for cleaning the bottom of the garbage can, all of these conflicts could be branded or rebranded to his advantage. One friend told me her husband had branded her the quote-unquote expert because she's a psychologist to justify deferring to her with decisions involving their children's education. I finally realized he was just citing my PhD to get out of the drudgery of dealing with school issues or having to read a parenting book, she said. Branding was even at the foundation of Christopher's parenting style. He introduced lofty public service campaigns about the importance of consistent bedtimes that lasted until it was my night to go out with friends. On those evenings, he'd host movie dinners where nobody got to bed on time or brushed their teeth as he cultivated his "Dad is more fun" sub-brand, distinguishing himself from my more practical brand of routines, eating your vegetables, and "how do you know until you've tried it" slogans. Now, this is a very comfortable area for us. We're talking about scorekeeping in marriage, scorekeeping in relationships, and Brooke and her husband sound like they're very much in the thick of it. I think it was kind of a novel way of phrasing it all in terms of branding. You know, when my father talks about sort of grace in relationships, he always talks about the mythologies we bring into marriage. That he's the responsible one, she's the the artist. Or he is the one who's bad with money, and she is the one who makes wise decisions. That these mythologies can become hardened into laws that we are constantly foisting on each other and imputing, in fact, to each other. But before we go into the nitty gritty here, which there's no way we can't, what do you guys think of this article?
I'm so worried for Christopher and Brooke, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of this is very right.
I'm like, when will you say, we were divorced 2 years ago and my life has gotten so much better.
I kept paging down to be like, where's the divorce? Where's the divorce?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I will say the negotiation stuff I think is very familiar, and I hope in every marriage and not just mine. And especially she pinpoints brilliantly that seems to happen when we bring children in. I don't remember a lot of negotiating pre-children, and I can remember a lot of advice about negotiation after we had kids from other couples. Like I can remember being told well, one Saturday you should sleep in, and then the next Saturday he should sleep, kind of thing. And that always felt a little, it felt very practical if you wanted more sleep, but it always felt a little weird to me. I don't know. It just didn't quite feel like marriage. And I really think that the opposite of sex is not abstinence. I actually think the opposite of sex is negotiation. I think that is the opposite of sex.
You heard it here
I'm
first.
just do you never want intimacy? Argue about the dishwasher like that.
I would go so far as to say the opposite of sex is resentment.
Yeah. No, totally.
But I
totally.
think I could not agree with you more, Sarah. We should put that's your next book right there. The opposite of sex is
negotiation.
No, I felt the same way.
That's very Esther Perel.
I was thinking to myself, well, you just won the major branding contest by publishing a thing in the New York Times.
Exactly. You went nuclear.
There's nothing yeah. What else did you guys think? I mean, do you ever deal with this in your own marriage, RJ?
Yeah, it hit way, way, way too close to home for me. But I also felt very thankful in that my wife is a lot more compassionate, I think, than the author of this particular piece. And we've talked a lot about it, and I think what we've realized is that a lot of the time when I draw attention to things that I've done, it's out of a real need for encouragement. I know we're going to talk about sort of personality traits later on, but one we may not discuss are the 5 love languages and how do you receive affection. And I'm definitely a words of affirmation kind of person, for people that subscribe to that way of thinking. And so I just need lots of encouragement. And so much so that when I encourage my wife about something, because she doesn't really care what I think about her, it's not her love language. She'll turn to me and she'll be like, "Oh, honey, do you need some encouragement right now? Aww. Is that why you're encouraging me?" So it's my need for encouragement. But then it's also sometimes my feelings of guilt that I'm not doing enough, that I'm not as present as I should be. And so then when I do something, it's like, "Oh, look, I am good. I'm trying. I'm doing my best here." So I'm just thankful for a wife that is a little more understanding and encouraging. The other thought I had vis-a-vis children, which Sarah, you already alluded to this, which was brilliant, is just how true that was. And it reminded me of a good friend of mine who he and his wife are both art history professors. And as part of their job, they led a sort of river cruise in Europe about a month ago. And they left their 2 boys at home with family. They're sort of 2 kind of middle school, high school age boys. And they got back and were like, how was it? And they were like, it was amazing. Like, it is incredible how well we get along when our children aren't around, and how much conflict. We love our children. Don't get me wrong. We love our children.
Yeah.
But raising children just brings so much conflict and decision making and differing opinions about how to deal with things and just stress into our relationship. And it was amazing how, like, it's like, oh yeah, this is why we got married. Like, we're really good together. And we forget that sometimes because we're so consumed with the children, which just highlights the need for, married people to get away from their kids every so often. And that's been brought really to home in our marriage because our littlest, again, Marshall, Dave just started preschool 2 weeks ago, and it has been revolutionary to have him in school, 5 or 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's like, finally, we have some breathing space in our life, and we'll remember. I mean, we love him to death, but we're like, oh yeah, we work really well when it's just the two of us. So I thought that was very insightful and true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm nailed to the wall because just last night I was telling Kate about something I had done in the house that was, I was doing laundry and I was folding it and I was sort of mentioning it. And it wasn't this, she phrases it as this narrative about men doing more domestic work, which it could be, but my father also used to sort of tell people when he'd done the dishes, I don't know if it's a male-female thing, but I do know that I also kind of need a little bit of the pat on the back. Like that's what I'm looking for. And but then she I think the other person, my poor long-suffering wife, will hear that as like, you're making me feel guilty for not doing more. And but you get into this scorekeeping thing in a relationship, and to sometimes these quote-unquote egalitarian marriages, what you're basically saying, I think you're the one who actually was the first person to talk to me about this, RJ, was this 50-50 ideal. Everyone always feels like they're doing more than 50%. Like every study has always shown that both men and women feel they're doing more than what they sort of signed up for, even if those are socially defined in slightly different ways. But when we do premarital counseling, we talk about it's not really 50-50, it's 100-100. And at least that's what Grace in Marriage says.
Absolutely.
I know that can be an excuse, but sorry, what were you saying?
Well, I mean, I think it would be remiss to just say, in studies, people feel like they're doing more, because in studies, we do know that women do more. I mean, that's just a fact. Women have the second shift. They come home from working all day and then they do this whole other thing. I don't know how that works out in other people's marriage. In my own marriage, I'm married to a guy that has a ton of night meetings. Just this week, we've got 3 nights that I'm putting the kids to bed by myself. But I also know that means he's running a really intense meeting. And I know that means, he came home last night at, 9:30 and was out like moving the recycling to the road. I don't know. Like, I feel like you have to find your own narrative of grace in the context of your specific marriage and your own, sort of just refusal to keep score. I mean, that's kind of like where, I can't remember the passage. We were doing a study on Paul's epistles at church a couple weeks ago, and someone had this really interesting translation. Gosh, I can't remember what the passage was, but it was about sort of encouraging Christians to not maybe not be jealous and early Christians. And this woman's really interesting text was like, this is an active thing, like it's a refusal. And I do think there's a certain amount of action involved in like, you have those thoughts where you're like, I mean, I have those as a woman where I'm like, I'm so tired and I'm putting the kids to bed, or there's so much laundry or whatever. And what is he doing? And I'm just like, nah. Like, I can't. Like, why? You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I mean, that's why we read this and we expect them to be divorced, because, like, it's become obviously such an overarching theme in their marriage, and that only leads to death, right? I mean, that never, it just never leads anywhere good. And I know we were going to kind of connect this a bit to the piece that Michael Sansbury wrote about the piece from the New York Times, that came out a couple of years ago that said that, there's research that people who fell, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but it's kind of like people who fell along more traditional domestic lines in terms of women doing more stuff at home had more sex. Is that kind of
I think that's basically
the gist of it?
The inconvenient finding.
Yeah, and that I've brought that study up at a couple of different, like if I do women's groups or I don't know, talks or whatever, and it like makes people live it. It's really interesting.
I'm shocked, Sarah.
Because people really, we really, especially these days, want to think about marriage as being this egalitarian effort. And I think, and honestly, I actually think it is, right? I think it is. I just think we're so consumed with our own narrative of how like we've been done wrong and we're working so hard that we can't see it.
Well, what you're saying, I think, what I'm hearing is that once you get into egalitarian is not, at least in my mind, it's not meant to be a euphemism for, accounting.
Right.
And once you get into accounting, then you get into entitlement, and once you get into entitlement, you get into resentment. Whether that goes in any marriage, I've never met a marriage where there's not resentment along the lines of entitlement. In no matter what they politically believe, no matter what kind of marriage they're modeling themselves on, and so clearly that sort of rights kind of talk, it may work in society when it comes to love. We all, what is it? We love those who've loved us. We're more willing to do 100% of the domestic work when we think that the person wants to give would jump in front of a bus for us.
Yes.
That's just how it works, no matter who you are. But I also find that what's interesting partly about this is it leads into our next article about the tyranny of personality testing. There's a new book out by Merv Emre. She wrote a book called The Personality Brokers, which profiles Catherine Cooks Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, who came up with the Myers-Briggs test or personality indicator. And it turns out it was concocted by Isabel Briggs Myers, the daughter, after she got married. Because she said there ought to be some highly intelligent division of labor that can be worked out so that everybody works, but not at the wrong things. And what she was talking about was specifically in her marriage. It was the first year of her marriage. She was trying to figure out men and women's respective roles in a successful marriage, not about waged work, but it quickly morphed into that. Emre credits. This is I'm sort of talking about an article that was written by J.C. Pan in the New Republic about this book, but the book's been covered everywhere. Clearly struck a nerve. Refers to these two ladies as being among the first to perceive how hungry the masses were for simple, self-affirming answers to the problem of self-knowledge. Yet the longing for that benevolent yet useful form of people sorting that Isabel found specifically in her marriage spurred the invention of this Myers-Briggs test. And it's based on Carl Jung's binaries of extroverted versus introverted, intuitive versus sensing, thinking versus feeling. And it was Isabel who pioneered it. And it's now used, they said, by 88 of the Fortune 100 companies. So for Isabel, Emre writes, the idea was not to accept work as a grim reality, but to set up the ideological conditions under which one would bind oneself to it freely and gladly, to a point of pride and a source of self-validation. And this relentless positivity persists today. There's an insistence among people who love Myers-Briggs that it not be called a test, but rather an indicator that contains no wrong answers. But the author asked how many of the 2 million annual test takers are actually seeking self-knowledge. According to one estimate, up to 70% of Americans have taken a personality test as part of a job application, which suggests that there's something coercive going on here, and it's a $500 million personality testing industry. Even questions that seem innocuous, such as, at parties, do you A, stay late with increasing energy, or B, leave early with decreased energy, come with a slight edge when it's an employer who's asking. Does staying late make you look irresponsible? Does leaving early suggest a reluctance to put in long hours on the job? While personality tests promise to help you find the best work to suit your personality, they also hint that showing that personality in a flattering light will be necessary if you want to find and keep a job. Though this pressure to conform is likely not what Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers envisioned for their creation, it's not wholly unexpected outcome of their penchant for people sorting. What Ethan wrote in last week's Weekender, he said that the takeaway is that while personality tests often deliver a language of understanding, when it is used within the confines of becoming something more productive, more marketable, more liked, the personality becomes one more ruling on who you ought to be. Now, have you guys taken the Myers-Briggs?
Yeah. Have I been to seminary in the Episcopal Church?
Am I a Christian?
Well, you should take the Enneagram then, RJ.
It's the Christian horoscope. That's what they
No,
say.
man, you've got to take the Enneagram. Have you taken it, RJ? We all tried to get you to. Did you do it?
I only haven't because I know how badly you want me to.
Dude.
I didn't have time. I got home. I was working late last night, and I'm like, I'm not taking
On
an
what?
Enneagram right now.
I don't want to hear that.
Well, what do you guys remember what types you are? Because I am an ENFJ, I think.
I am an
So
I-
judgy.
I'm an INFJ.
So judgy.
Yeah.
I'm an ENFP. So there.
ENFP.
But we're all NFs. Is that right?
Yeah, NFs.
That makes sense.
N
That
means
makes a lot of sense,
intuition.
actually. See, there you go.
A feeling.
It's true. It's
we're
all
deep
true.
feelers. Sarah and I tend to judge, whereas you tend to just perceive.
Ooh,
exactly.
that's true, actually.
Well,
I'll roll into RJ's office and be like, "What's happening?" And RJ will be like, "That's interesting." And then I'm like, "I need you to meet my rage with rage." So,
Well, but it is what I think Ethan was trying to draw out, and what they mention is that there's no science behind at least the Myers-Briggs, and that it immediately, when you pronounce a judgment on someone, a category, and that's what a category is. That's the law. It categorizes us. It immediately becomes something, a judgment on what you're not, on what sort of where you're failing. And I know that there's last couple of years there was a great TED talk about sort of the benefits of being an introvert, but the reason that existed was because it was sort of implied that being introverted is worse than being extroverted, or that thinking is better than feeling, or feeling is better than thinking. We attach value judgments. I don't know exactly which value judgments we attach, but isn't it immediate? It immediately becomes a box that we want to get out of.
Dave, I have to say that has not been entirely my experience, and whether or not I believe in Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or love language or whatever it might be, I think one positive thing about them is at least it gets into people's minds that other people with whom they have relationships may not be totally free agents. You know, that they may not have quite as much control over how they act and who they are as we like to believe. And in so much as that's what it accomplishes, it actually creates a space for compassion.
Oh, yeah.
You know, to the degree that the Myers-Briggs creates a space where you can say, okay, I wouldn't do things that way. And maybe I find that slightly off-putting, but I also understand, like, that's who this person is. You know, and I'm not going to judge them for being who they are and expect them necessarily to be like me or to see the world the way that I see the world, or to process things the way that I process them. Then I think that's actually helpful. Sure. Right? That goes hand in hand with what we talk about, the bondage of the will. Yeah. You know, that people aren't as free as they would like to believe they are. And I remember the moment about 15, 20 years ago when my wife and I sort of discovered this doctrine, you know, if you want to call it doctrine of the bondage of the will, that people aren't free. And we sort of did a little thought experiment. We said, okay, what would it look like if we started to see other people as not being free, but as being bound? And what we discovered is it gave us a tremendous amount of compassion for them. Because rather than looking at them and saying, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing that? Why aren't you more like me? It'd be like, well, you know, they're just dealing with their own stuff, just like I am. Sarah and I went to this amazing lunch yesterday with this woman who founded a community called Brookwood, which is a residential community, lifelong residential community for people who have severe autism. That's right, Sarah. Am I describing it correctly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she was amazing. Of course, she got it. She's 90 years old. She got into this work because she had a daughter who, when she was 1, got mumps, which irretrievably damaged her brain, basically, this daughter of hers. And then she was looking for a way to give her daughter a productive, meaningful life. But one thing she said, which was so profound, was, we're all a problem. Every single
Yes.
one of us is a problem. And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. And to some degree, that's what these personality tests do. They say, okay, there's some things that are beautiful and wonderful about you, and there's some things that are a problem. And maybe it's good for you to be, even if it's doesn't totally accurately diagnose the problem, for you to have some awareness that you are a problem and for other people to know that about you. I think there's something kind of helpful about that, because again, it creates a space for grace, compassion, mercy, acceptance, rather than necessarily, you just should have the power within yourself to be different than you are. So that's my take a little bit, which is maybe it's too perceiving.
Sam Shoemaker said everyone has a problem, is a problem, or lives with a problem.
All three.
What about you,
I would say
Sarah?
probably all three all the time.
I love the Enneagram, and I like it more than Myers-Briggs because the Enneagram is a bit more brutal in what it tells you about yourself that is not good, and I always need that in my life. So, yeah, I mean, for in my marriage, actually, the Enneagram, this episode's like all about marriage. The Enneagram has been amazing because when I realized the type that my husband was, and because he took the test, and the type that I am, like, and you actually can look and sort of research how those types interact. It was like us to a T, and it was kind of creepy, but it has given me, like, Josh is a 7. Sevens love, they're called the experiencer. They love things to be fun. They love challenges. They love, like, visioning things. And I'm so like, and I'm a 3. I'm an achiever. I want to look good at all times, which means I'm not going to take big risks. I'm always going to be obsessed with like things, with the people's perceptions of me being positive. You know what I mean? And so it's really interesting to do ministry together and to watch him take these like huge risks at his church. And I'm like I'm like literally on the sidelines with a bag, like breathing into it. Like, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this. Like everyone's going to see us fail, And sometimes we do fail, and then sometimes things don't. And it's like kind of amazing to be married to somebody that just like does it.
What's your wing?
It kind of pushes me in an interesting way. But yeah, I remember reading, and I haven't read the book, but I read a little bit. Richard Rohr did a book about the Enneagram, and he like spiritually types people. And Josh's type, I think, is St. Francis. It's like a very like, I mean, in St. Francis in the modern way we think about St. Francis, right? Like as being like this, like out there in the world, like experiencing it, like,
Josh lives naked in the woods.
Basically. And a 3 was Dorothy Day, who started the Catholic worker movement. And I'm like, we have the worst marriage ever. Like St. Francis and Dorothy Day is like, they're not going to meet on Tinder. So anyway,
Sarah, what's your wing?
2. Yeah. And like everyone at Mockingbird, like
are in a
all the
cult.
men at
You're in a cult.
Mockingbird
This
are
is why I will
2,
never-
right?
This is
like
why
you're
I will
all
never do
2s.
No,
Enneagram.
I finally took it, and I actually got the right answer. I finally figured out what I am. I'm a 3 wing 4, which makes a whole lot more
interesting.
sense. It makes me feel a whole lot less flattered, frankly.
When you say wing,
Yeah,
it just
no,
makes me
it's-
think of Top Gun.
It makes you think about what? Top Gun?
Yeah, you can be my wingman anytime.
What wing are you?
Ice.
Well, she in the article that J.C. Pan writes in the New Republic, she does interview people that have experienced the Myers-Briggs or personality test as basically gospel as opposed to law. It's sort of what you talk about, RJ. I mean, they've said it's such a relief to get this, to finally hear, oh, this is why I'm like this. This is why my husband and I have this problem. Or this is why, I gravitate towards such and such. And I think you can experience it that way, especially if like self-knowledge has been just denied you or it's been vilified in your life. But then it can also, when it becomes a tool for production, it can become a new a debilitating law. I think I really do think it can experience both ways. So they're not like, I don't think they're good or bad. And I too, Sarah, I much prefer the Enneagram to the Myers-Briggs because it tells you what your liabilities are. I mean,
it does. I mean,
your sin.
one of my favorite things to do if I'm like in the thick of having to like make a hard decision at work or in my personal life with my kids or marriage or whatever, is to go to the Enneagram Institute website. We're all in. It's a cult, RJ. But I'll look. They have this like 1 to 9 levels. Like, so this is a 3. It is at your healthiest, and this is a 3 at the least healthy. And I will read these because so you're an unhealthy 3 is, you guys are going to be like, she's a psycho. And I am. Is devious and deceptive so that their mistakes and wrongdoings will not be exposed. Untrustworthy, maliciously betraying or sabotaging people to triumph over them. Delusionally jealous of others. Yes, that's me like at my worst. And like, it's helpful. I know it sounds crazy, but it's helpful to read that.
Is that true?
Oh, 100% true. Like, ask me how middle school was. I was terrifying. You know what I mean?
Remind me to never tell you anything ever again.
Exactly. But at my best, so I'll read the best stuff like self-accepting, inner-directed, authentic, everything they seem to be, modest and charitable, self-deprecatory humor, and a fullness of heart emerge, gentle and benevolent. So it's like, that's helpful for me.
The good and the bad. So. The good and the bad.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the good and the bad, guys, we're gonna end with the final incredible article that appeared in the New Yorker by Khalifa Sana called "The Unlikely Endurance of Christian Rock." Christian rock. I don't think we've ever talked Christian rock on here.
You're a huge fan, Dave.
Well, it depends on what you mean by Christian rock, and I think that he does quote at the beginning the great King of the Hill. The cartoon, the Mike Judge cartoon, where Hank Hill, the Texan, is confronted with a guitar-wielding pastor and delivers an unsparing judgment. He says, "You're not making Christianity better. You're making rock and roll worse." And I think that's certainly how I view much of it. But let me read this from Khalifa. Despite decades of mockery, Christian rock has proven remarkably durable, creating a lucrative and sometimes lively cultural ecosystem which generations of musicians have been happy enough to call home. And then he goes on to, talk about Larry Norman, the great sort of the godfather of Christian rock, even though he would have hated that term, and Greg Thornberry's wonderful new biography that people should all pick up. It's a really good book. Like many rock stars of his generation, Larry Norman was proudly anti-establishment, which meant that the increasing popularity of his chosen field presented something of an existential crisis. By the 1980s, Norman had grown contemptuous of the Christian music business that had sprung up in his wake. Norman hated the idea that his faith should dictate or limit his subject matter. He once said that because he was a Christian, all of his songs were necessarily Christian songs, no matter what they were about. So then you ask, well, what counts as Christian music? And this is the great question. In gospel music, form and content are joined. The term denotes both a style and a message, leaving no room for theological ambiguity. Likewise, the sound of 70s Christian pop was warm and sweet, designed to reinforce the hopeful spirit of the words. But in the 80s, many Christian rock bands embraced snarling guitars, which were harder to interpret, and they, of course, reference Stryper and To Hell with the Devil. And some band that has a song called Good God, God Good, Devil Bad, sort of boils it right down for you. Some Christian bands found that the obsession with lyrics gave them freedom, that they could pretty much make whatever noise they wanted as long as the words were sufficiently joyful. But do Christian bands have a propaganda problem? And this is where I've got sort of close to the bone. It is certainly true that most Christian rock bands were obliged to follow doctrinal rules, but these bands weren't necessarily much different from the many secular bands that wrote protest songs. In the history of rock, furious conviction has been neither rare nor necessarily unhelpful. There is no easy way to distinguish between a musician who spouts prepackaged doctrine and one who boldly stands up for what is right. So, there's more to say, but Christian rock, where are you guys with it?
RJ, I feel like this is going to be more your wheelhouse.
Why do you say that?
Because I've heard you sing the Great Litany at St. Martin's, and you have that voice, man.
Because I sing.
No, but you have that, like, you can make it a little edgy if you wanted to, you know?
Yeah.
You've listened to some of this stuff, right?
I've definitely gone through, like, jars of clay phases in my life. Christian rock is strange because it's oftentimes this uncomfortable mixing of the reverent and the irreverent, right? That rock and roll sort of by its nature is irreverent, but Christianity, when it's conveyed in a certain kind of way, is supposed to be reverent and kind of easy and peaceful and hopeful and maybe not entirely honest. Isn't that what Bono said, that he never, the problem with Christian music is that it doesn't tell the truth about the human condition. It sort of glosses over everything. And in that quote, talked about prepackaged doctrine as opposed to telling the truth. But it doesn't seem like Jesus ever had a problem with telling the truth, or Paul had a problem with telling the truth. So I don't think the problem with Christian rock is it's because it's Christianity misinterpreted or misproclaimed as being something that always has to be sort of bubblegum and glossed over and dishonest and I think there is tremendous hope in telling the truth about the human condition and pointing to the only hope we have in Jesus. But when you start making it all saccharine, then it just gets oppressive and kind of icky, and that's why I think this is what Mockingbird is all about, right? That we're about is sort of all truth is God's truth. And wherever we find the truth, whether it's in Christian culture or so-called quote-unquote secular culture, we point it out and we say, yes, this is true, and this is what Jesus talked about, this is what the Bible talked about, and we don't sort of segment things into sacred and secular, because there's sort of we think those categories are inaccurate. Is that fair to say?
Totally. Totally.
So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I don't, I sort of plead ignorance on a lot of this. This wasn't, I went to, Episcopal youth group when I was a kid, which was just a lot of listening to, I don't know, rap music and playing Spin the Bottle. And so I didn't really have a lot of experience with this kind of music as a teenager. The limited experience I do have, which I hesitate to say, there was a guy that I was totally had a crush on. One of my friends was like, you should come to church with me. So I was like, ignorant. I was like, sure. And it was like a youth service, and I didn't really know what that meant, but I walked in and there was smoke machines and a rock and roll band. And there was this guy who was a drummer, and I was a junior or senior in high school, totally enamored. And thinking he's a musician, this is so cool. He's a drummer, he's gonna be really edgy. And then when we dated, I was like, this is not what I anticipated. You know what I mean? Because he was so in this world of purity culture and of praising God in a way that was not what I had experienced at all. Yeah, and then we broke up, and then the last I heard, he was under arrest, house arrest for possession, which I always felt guilty of, that I had somehow had that effect on him or something. So that's
Ooh. Well, they also
that's
a great story.
It's sort of, you want to hear the worst part of it. I shouldn't. Okay, so the worst part of it. Feel free to cut this, please. They had bowling night. This is youth group in Mississippi, right, with Baptist Church. So they had bowling night. And so that was a really exciting thing. And it was blacklight night. Have you guys ever been to blacklight night at the bowling alley?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So,
every night, it seems like, is black night.
Again, are we Christians?
So, right. Okay. So I had never been, but this was a big deal for them. So before we went in, we made out in the car. Dave, I feel like I've told this story before. We made out in the car, and, just kissing. But we walked in, and the unfortunate thing was I had on a lot of lip gloss, and it had just gotten all over both of our faces. And then we walked in, and the drummer of the praise band at the Baptist church was glowing on his face.
Looked like the Joker.
Yeah. So that wasn't my scene.
Oh gosh. That's a great story. You've not told it before, Sarah. That's
Sarah Conding, defiling evangelicals since 1985.
Oh my God, it's terrible.
I have a sort of complicated relationship with Christian rock because I like a lot of it, and I think Jars of Clay, by the way, is pretty great. I found that anytime you get a genre of music that you've sort of dismissed wholeheartedly, it's almost like a challenge to your mind. How open-minded are you going to be? And I almost find
That's
it
wise.
interesting to like find the good thing in it. And I like some of those early Larry Norman records. The production's awesome. And one of my favorite records is Tommy James of the Shondells. He did that record Christian of the World, which is like 1971. It's very early. It's not really Christian rock because it's very Jesus people-y though. And but then, a couple of years ago, I kept reading these articles about John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats. You guys know who that is? He's a novelist. He's an incredible musician and a very sort of...
You're so beyond our knowledge right
Well,
now,
he's
Dave.
sort of-
You're going to a totally different place. I love
He's
it.
this kind of edgy Catholic guy who's very literary and cool, very lo-fi, and has got this cult around him almost. And in interviews, he would always talk about his very favorite record was Amy Grant's Lead Me On. And he would say, he would say like, people think I'm kidding or I'm trying to be arch or hip by saying that. I actually really, really love that record. So I finally got it. And you know what? It's amazing. It's an incredible record. I love it. It's a totally, I think it's true to the faith. It's all the best parts of that kind of culture. And it's got a Jimmy Webb song on there. I'm obsessed with Jimmy Webb. But mainly I really love the first song, 1974, which is about her conversion. And it's beautiful. And Amy was sort of in charge of her music at that point. It's well produced. So that was really eye-opening to me. I think the deeper question is like, if there's a predefined message or a prepackaged message, or there's no freedom to actually explore in your lyrics, then does that diminish the art? And today, I would say that the way that a lot of the political messages, a lot of artists feel like if they get called out if they're not taking political stands in their music, and yet it's all seems to be quite prepackaged from where I'm sitting. It's very I know what they're going to say. It's not like it's news to anyone that they've got sort of progressive views about X, Y, or Z. And so the doctrinaire, the dogmatism has sort of shifted in a funny way. So
Hashtag seculosity.
Hashtag seculosity.
I want to say, like, when I was in high school, someone, I'd listen to some of this music, and a lot of what RJ was saying about it sort of being saccharine, and also, I think we have to say a lot of this music feels like what we need to do for God, like how I'm worshiping, I'm here worshiping you, like you got to talk about what you're doing, and that was always very, it just felt very false to me. Like I couldn't, and not that it is false, but it felt very false to me. And I don't know that we call this rock and roll, maybe we do, but somebody had me listen to Third Day's "Don't You Know I'll Always Love You," and I can hardly talk about that song without crying, because it was the first time I remember hearing the gospel in music. Do you guys know this song?
I don't.
Okay, so
Do we have a Mockingbird Spotify account? I'm sort of feeling like we should have
do.
one. If we don't.
Yeah, I should probably put together another Christian rock playlist.
Just like the
amazing.
chorus on this is so good. Don't you know I've always loved you, even before there was time. Though you turn away, I'll tell you still. Don't you know I've always loved you, and I always will. Like, I can remember hearing that the first time and being like, oh my God. Like, it was like a whole different way of hearing about God. So, I don't think that this music is, I think you guys are right. It has a lot of value. It's just,
when it becomes this Pelagian thing that's just straight up, I'm going to do this for God. I vow to always do this stuff. And you're like, well, that is, as RJ said, that's not really telling the truth. Or when it becomes this sort of,
You just can't sing
this
those songs.
juvenile, what I would say, like, the South Park version of where Cartman he wants to become a Christian rock star. So he just takes these like absurdly sort of romantic and sexual songs and just substitutes, instead of baby, it's Jesus. And like, anytime you're in that territory, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But Amy Grant isn't like that remotely.
Amy Grant's
I've very
amazing.
rarely heard any Jars of Clay songs that fit that. There are worship songs that are like this. And you know what? I will say that what's strange is that
Jesus is my boyfriend.
the
songs.
guy from the New Yorker decided not to touch on Hillsong at all. And those are they have basically created they've kind of a Coldplay ized or Ed Sheeranized the entire Christian music, and every 5 seconds they've got a new record coming out. And I have a feeling if I dug that deep into that, we would find some great, authentic, wonderful stuff. We'd also probably find a whole lot of overly romanticized and slightly Pelagian kind of stuff. So,
Ooh, I was going to say hullabaloo. I like what you said.
Well, they're aspirational songs, right? They're
Aspirational.
I wish that I was
Right.
like this. I wish that I
Yeah.
could be like this, that I could
Yeah.
sing this honestly. But if you're telling the truth, or like
Right.
you've gotten, you've yelled at your kids on the way to church in the morning, or
Right.
in the car as you're listening,
And then
to
you're
this,
like, come on, kids, we will, let us praise,
You have a lovely singing voice, by the way. Aren't you an alto? I feel like we've done a little quartet at St. Martin's before for Thanksgiving service. Sarah.
Oh, gosh.
Maybe we should record a song. Yeah.
Ooh,
well,
yeah.
people don't know this, but RJ has been known to break into full singing in the middle of a sermon. At least I've been present for such a thing. And RJ, maybe do you want?
That's my wife's favorite thing, especially early in the morning before she's had a cup of coffee. She's like, "You better shut up right now."
RJ, to
here.
close us out, will you give us like the benediction song or some kind of
Ooh, hit it, Arch.
doxology? Come on, give it to us.
My gosh, what? That's
On the
what am I
night.
supposed to say to? What am I supposed to do to that? Wait, let me think for a sec.
Give us a real one. Give us one like one of the ones you used to do at St. Paul's.
Oh.
Oh my gosh.
Do it.
So I'm not doing that.
Can you just do praise God from whom all blessings flow? Can you do that?
All right, sure. Ready?
All right, here we go.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
I told y'all. It's like a little bit rock and roll.
No, not really. Not at all. Oh my God, you can't put that on. I'm so embarrassed.
Yes, you are totally putting that
Putting
on.
it on. I feel blessed, and I feel grateful to both of you for being on the cast, and just want to say we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.